My name is Isabella, and on a cold December night in 2022, my life was changed forever. I had a near-death experience that showed me the truth about the dangers lurking in our digital world. What I saw was terrifying, but it also gave me a purpose: to share this story with as many people as I can. If you're a parent, a grandparent, or someone who cares about the next generation, I urge you to listen closely. This isn't just about me, it's about all of us. It started like any other Friday night. I was curled up on the couch in my living room, scrolling endlessly through TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. Hours slipped by without me even noticing. My parents had gone to bed, my siblings were in their rooms, and I was completely alone with the glow of my phone screen. I felt this strange dizziness come over me, like the world around me was spinning. I thought maybe I was just tired or dehydrated. I told myself to get up and grab some water, but before I could move, everything went black. The next thing I knew, I was floating above my own body. There I was, slumped over on the couch, my phone still in my hand. Panic and confusion washed over me. Was I dead? What was happening? I tried to scream, but no sound came out. Suddenly, the room was flooded with a brilliant light. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen. When I turned to look, I saw him, Jesus. He didn't look like the paintings or the Sunday school depictions. He was radiant, powerful, and so real it made everything else seem like a shadow. His presence was overwhelming, a mix of love and authority that left no room for doubt or fear. "Come," he said, extending his hand toward me. His voice was calm but carried a weight that made it impossible to refuse. Without hesitation, I took his hand, and instantly the living room disappeared. We were now standing in a vast, dark void, surrounded by hovering screens, phones, tablets, computers, TVs, even VR headsets. These devices weren't just glowing, they seemed alive, pulsating with a dark, sinister energy. Faces appeared on the screens, millions of them, their eyes blank and hypnotized. It was as if they were trapped in some kind of spell. Jesus gestured toward the screens. "This is the battlefield," he said, his voice filled with sorrow and urgency. "The enemy uses these to enslave your generation. He knows your potential, what you could accomplish for my kingdom, and so he seeks to destroy you." I was stunned. "But how? It's just technology, it's just entertainment," I said. Jesus turned to me, his eyes filled with sadness. "It started that way," he said. "But what you see as harmless has become a trap. These screens are not tools anymore. They are chains." I looked closer and saw chains extending from the devices, wrapping around people's wrists, necks, and even their hearts. The chains had words etched into them: comparison, anxiety, lust, distraction, pride, and envy. The sight was horrifying. "They don't even know they're chained," I whispered. Jesus nodded. "That is the enemy's greatest trick, to enslave without their knowledge." As I stared, the screens began to glow red, and a terrifying symbol appeared on each one. It wasn't just on the screens. It began to burn into people's foreheads and hands. "What is that?" I asked, my voice shaking. Jesus looked at me with a seriousness that made my heart stop. "It is not yet the mark of the beast," he said, "but it is conditioning them to accept it. The enemy is preparing their hearts to worship him instead of me. They are being trained to value convenience, approval, and instant gratification above all else. When the time comes, they will accept the mark without question." Tears streamed down my face as the scene shifted. I was now standing in the middle of a war zone. But this wasn't a physical battlefield. It was a spiritual one. Families were divided. Parents and grandparents were yelling at the younger generation, accusing them of being lazy, selfish, and addicted. The younger generation yelled back, blaming their elders for creating these problems. Meanwhile, in the shadows, the enemy watched, laughing as he sowed division. "They are supposed to be united," Jesus said, his voice heavy with sadness. "But the enemy has turned them against each other." "What can they do?" I asked. "How can they fight back?" Jesus placed a hand on my shoulder. "They must pray," he said. "They must teach my word. They must set an example by putting me above all else, even their own distractions." I turned and saw older people glued to their phones, scrolling through news or playing games while their children wandered into darkness. It broke my heart. The scene shifted again, and I found myself in a church. But it wasn't like any church I'd ever seen. People were there, but they weren't present. Some were scrolling on their phones during worship. Others were taking selfies during the sermon. The glow of screens filled the sanctuary, drowning out the presence of God. "This is my house," Jesus said, his voice trembling with both anger and sorrow. "But it has become a marketplace for distractions. My people no longer seek me with their whole hearts. They seek entertainment, validation, and convenience." Desperation welled up inside me. "What can I do?" I asked. "I'm just a kid." Jesus looked into my eyes. "You are more than you think you are," he said. "You are my messenger. Warn them. Tell them what you have seen. Some will listen, and their eyes will be opened." In that moment, I felt a weight settle on my heart. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I knew I couldn't stay silent. Suddenly, I was back in my living room, gasping for air. My phone was still in my hand, but it felt different, cold, heavy, and sinister. I threw it across the room and fell to my knees, crying out to God. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I prayed for my friends, my family, my generation, and even the older generations. I prayed for courage to share what I had seen. The next morning, as sunlight poured through my window, I realized I had a choice. I couldn't keep this to myself. I began writing down everything I had seen, detailing every chain, every screen, every warning. I shared it with my family, and their reactions surprised me. My mom broke down in tears, confessing her own struggle with screen addiction. My dad, usually so stoic, admitted he'd spent more time on his phone than in prayer. My siblings listened in stunned silence, their own phones temporarily forgotten. As days turned into weeks, I began to speak at youth groups, churches, and community centers. Each time I told my story, I saw hearts change. Teenagers put their phones away during my talks, their faces showing a mix of guilt and hope. Parents wept, vowing to reconnect with their kids, but not everyone welcomed my message. Some scoffed, calling me dramatic or brainwashed. "It's just a phone," they'd say. "You're overreacting." I wanted to argue, to make them see the truth, but then I remembered Jesus' words. "Some will listen, and their eyes will be opened." My job wasn't to force anyone to believe. It was to plant seeds and trust God to do the rest. And so I keep speaking, writing, and praying, knowing that even if one soul is saved, it's worth it. If you're hearing this, I believe it's because Jesus wants you to hear this warning. This isn't just about kids and their phones. It's about all of us. The enemy is using technology to distract, divide, and destroy. He is conditioning us to accept what's coming. If we don't wake up, it will be too late. Parents, grandparents, older friends, you have a role to play. Pray for your children and grandchildren. Talk to them. Set an example by putting down your own devices and seeking God first. And to my generation, don't let the enemy steal your soul through a screen. Seek Jesus. Read His Word. Find your worth in Him, not in likes, comments, or followers. The time is short. The choice is yours.